And we will start with the quarterback position, of course. Dylan Gabriel, the returning starter here. Jackson Arnold, the 5-star, right behind him. If anyone else is playing meaningful snaps, we're in huge trouble here at Oklahoma. So we'll focus mainly on those two guys. But Dylan Gabriel returns. By most stats that you look at, he was a top 25 quarterback a year ago, but he was probably in that 20 to 25 range. So obviously a lot of room for growth here from his game, from those clutch moments, from those fourth down scenarios, from really just making that one pass completion that he wasn't a year ago. Because I think that really does, it's kind of a cliche, but it takes him from good to great. And I hope OU fans are able to appreciate that, because he should be more comfortable in year two at Oklahoma. And we'll see what happens here on the field.
Adam, the crazy part about Dylan Gabriel, when you look at his statistics over the course of his career, everybody was extremely high about this kid coming out of UCF. You go back to 2019, 2020, this kid had a completion percentage of right at about 60%, about 3,700 yards each of those two seasons. And then you look at what he did at Oklahoma a year ago. 62.7% completion percentage. That's the highest of his career so far. And even though he was hurt for the full Texas game, almost 3/4 of the TCU game, he still threw for nearly 3,200 yards and had a passer rating that was just as good, if not better, than what he did during his 2 seasons in Oklahoma. So I think that going into this year, another season with Jeff Lebby, a full off season with Schmitty. We've got some good weapons at the wide receiver position, even though a lot of those guys are unproven at this point. There are a lot of weapons that DG is going to have at his disposal, and I think that this is going to be an opportunity where Dylan Gabriel is going to build off his performance in the Cheez-It Bowl a year ago, where I thought he played his best game in an Oklahoma uniform against Florida State, and I'm really excited about what 8's going to do this upcoming season. And I think you could also probably make the claim, Adam, that Dylan Gabriel, he's taken his game to the next level, but he's also kind of been forced to do so just because of Jackson Arnold coming in behind him, a guy that, when you look at his arm and you watch the way he throws the football, has a higher ceiling than Dylan. But just at this point, right now, a guy that's playing his 5th year of football compared to a true freshman, Dylan obviously takes the cake. But I'm expecting a very, very good season out of Dylan Gabriel.
I'm expecting the same thing, and I'm hoping that most OU fans are hoping for that as well. I know the Crimson Captain's doing a really cool series on the fan survey results. I've seen a peek at some of those as far as, and one question that was asked on there specifically was, assuming complete health in the quarterback room, does Jackson Arnold start more than one or more games this year? And it's probably about 3 out of 10 OU fans are expecting Jackson Arnold to just overtake Dylan Gabriel and start games this year. I don't see any scenario that happens this year. I mean, he's a guy that he threw just 6 interceptions last year, so he's going to take care of the ball. He's not going to have a Spencer Rattler scenario where he's just giving the ball away. It just based on 3+ years of him starting. He hasn't done that yet. He's not going to start that now. He's going to look more comfortable. We saw some of his best football at the end of the year there, like you mentioned, against Florida State, against Texas Tech. So this is a guy that he's not going to relinquish this position, and OU fans shouldn't want that, because unless your name is Trevor Lawrence, 5-star quarterbacks usually are pretty up and down as true freshman quarterbacks. We all like to conveniently forget about Caleb Williams and the way he played against Iowa State and Baylor in his true freshman year, and only selectively remember the really great game against Texas that he had. So if we want success for this team, we need Dylan Gabriel to be one of those top 25 and really preferably a top 15 quarterback. I think he's certainly capable of that. It's harder to look at some of his stats last year because he did have a game and a half that he truly missed, and that really hurt some of his stats. But you look at what he did on a yards per completion perspective, number 14 in the country. Look at what he did from passing touchdowns, number 25. You add in a game and a half, he probably moves up into the top 20 there. So I think there's a lot of ways that he'll just look a lot better at the end of the day as a Sooner, with more control over the offense. And I think just overall, Brent Venables and Jeff Lebby more collaborative on, okay, how do we help the health of this team and the tempo and the pace and the way we call some of those certain situational strategies there. So I'm expecting some big things out of Dylan Gabriel.
Well, and Adam,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you look at Dylan's statistics in his entire career in college so far, he has well over 1,300 pass attempts, and he's only thrown 20 interceptions. So he does a really good job of taking care of the football. And then when you try to forecast what are some areas in which, DG can be better for the 2023 season? It's obviously the first one that comes to mind are, the plays in between the hash marks. It's the throws over the middle. That was something that, Dylan, struggled a bit with last year, the high throws. So we'll see if Austin Stogner, that big, tight end target, if he can make a difference for DG this year. Third downs is one where Dylan struggled a little bit last year, making some errant throws on crucial downs. But then I think the biggest thing, Adam, where you're going to see a real difference from Dylan this upcoming year, knowing that you have a competent backup in Jackson Arnold, I think that the quarterback run game is going to be something that Oklahoma is going to not rely on, but you're definitely going to see Dylan using his legs a lot more. Which if you watch any of Jeff Lebby's offenses over the last 5-6 years, particularly with Matt Corral at Ole Miss, he likes to utilize the quarterback run game, the read option, the quarterback draw. And I think that he's going to have the ability to kind of take the handcuffs off of Dylan and do that a little bit more this season.
Certainly a piece of the puzzle that we just weren't able to utilize at all last year. And so we really didn't get to see what Dillon Gabriel's running ability was, in my opinion, but I'm excited to see what that looks like. Now that we've kind of gotten out of the way that like Dillon Gabriel's our guy, we're expecting him to probably be a top 15 quarterback. I think he's probably right in that tier nationally. There's Lincoln on the podcast, as always.
There he is.
Lincoln the dog. But I think right behind like your Caleb Williams, your Drake Mays type of, elite level quarterbacks, I think Dillon Gabriel should be able to settle into that second tier right behind some of those really elite guys. But Jackson Arnold, we don't expect him to start any games this year unless there's injuries. What's best case scenario look like for Arnold?
It's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, obviously, in one instance, you want to see Jackson Arnold, but also at the same time, too, you really don't, because if you're not seeing Jackson Arnold, that means that Dillon Gabriel is, one, staying healthy, and he's also playing really well. So I think best-case scenario for Oklahoma, you use the first 2 to 3 games, the Arkansas States, the SMUs, the Tulsas, you use that as an opportunity to get him in. Maybe play a quarter, maybe even a half. If Oklahoma takes care of business and plays the way that they should against those inferior opponents, then I think that you could ultimately see, at least a half, maybe even a little bit more against some of those to kind of ease Jackson Arnold into this season as a Division I football player. And then, as we get a little bit closer towards the end of the season, conference play, whether it is an Iowa State or maybe a West Virginia, something like that, then you could possibly see Jackson Arnold in full time. You just don't want to have a situation where when you look up at the end of the season, he has next to no experience whatsoever, and he'll ultimately be taking his first meaningful snaps of highly competitive, Division I Power 5 football in the SEC against some of those defenses. So best case scenario, you ease him into some of those games, get him familiar at playing at this level against this type of competition at this speed. You just don't want to see him having to play any meaningful rest, because that means, one, Dillon Gabriel's hurt, or two, Dillon Gabriel's just not playing good football whatsoever. And that spells major problems for Oklahoma.
I think the best success for him in 2023 is maybe somewhat out of his control. And it's really just, hey, we need him to probably play in about 6 or 7 games. And I think that's pretty easy in the non-conference schedule. Like, he'll be able to play, hopefully, a good chunk of that second half against Arkansas State. Maybe same thing against Tulsa, potentially similar against SMU if the defense can hold up there. But beyond that, there's a lot of teams in the Big 12 that OU should be able to create some separation from, your Iowa States, your West Virginias, and so forth. And so if this team is reaching full potential like we think they could, then that's great. We're going to see a lot of Jackson Arnold in that scenario, because we will have some healthy leads in some of those games. But I also wouldn't shy away from using him in, the second quarter against Cincinnati, for example. Give him 2 or 3 plays, maybe to lead off a series, hand the ball off once, make an easy completion. Just get out there, get in a road environment. I don't think that's I don't expect to see it, but I wouldn't mind seeing it at the same time either. Have a couple plays, some safe, easy plays to run. Probably you would run those with Dillon Gabriel anyway. And then just have him out there on the field to get some experience doing that. I would love to see him in some meaningful snaps, just to ratchet up the experience.
Well, and Adam, if we do get to see him, I hope it's a situation where they leave the ones in there for him to lead that offense. And it's not a scenario where he's playing with the 2s or even the 3rd string, guards or something like that. If you're going to allow this kid to go in there and play, give him, his give him his full, all the tools in his belt, give him the full capability to lead that offense. And you just hope it's not one of those situations, or again, depending on which way you want to look at it, if you do put him in and he's just so good that you don't want to take him off the field, then you get yourself into a situation like we saw with Caleb and Spencer, where the minute Dylan makes a mistake, people are automatically going to be saying, okay, Jackson Arnold, let's see it. Let's kind of slow down a little bit.
It's going to happen regardless.
It's going to happen, and careful what you wish for. As good of a player as Caleb was his first year, everybody remembers the Texas game. Didn't look so good in Stillwater. Didn't look so good in Waco. I mean, there are some freshman growing pains that kind of comes with the territory once you go from high school to Division I football. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Two guys who were true freshmen last year were the running backs, Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk. Kind of that two-headed monster that we're expecting to lead the backfield this fall. You've also got some more freshmen, Caleb Hicks, Dalen Smothers in the mix there. You've got an old veteran and Marcus Major guy who feels like he's been around OU for a really long time. And then I guess some walk-ons. I know everyone likes to talk about Tawi Walker. People were talking about him a ton last year. Really didn't play any meaningful snaps. I don't expect that again this year to change. But you've got your two-headed monster there. Tyler, I'll put you on the spot right now. Who do you think is going to lead this backfield statistically from a yards perspective and a touchdown perspective?
I'm going to go Javonte Barnes on both of those. Many people try to project, okay, is Oklahoma going to have the ability to have two 1,000-yard rushers? And the immediate answer is yes, when you've got guys as talented as Barnes and Sawchuk. But I think that it is going to be an instance where they're going to use the first 2 to 3 games to try to find out who that alpha is in that room. And I think it's going to be Javonte Barnes. But even though you've got guys like Tawi Walker or you've got Marcus Major, who I'm close to calling the Perry Ellis of college football because he's been around for so long, you hope that he can stay healthy, because when he is healthy, he does have the ability to be a difference maker. But I think it's going to be very similar to what we saw with Samaje and Joe, with Kennedy and Trey Sermon, where you're going to have a 1-2 punch, a thunder and lightning with Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk. And again, if this offensive line can progress and play as well, and I like some of the things that we're hearing coming out of fall camp over the course of the last 3 weeks of practice, if the offensive line continues to gel and they can play well, I think that Oklahoma is going to get back to running the football at a much, much higher level. And I expect a big year out of all the running backs, particularly Javonte Barnes.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And we're going to talk about receivers here in a second, but that's kind of a big reason that, I think it's going to be more of a ground game offense, or at least a bigger focus, at least early on, until some of the footing is gained for those younger receivers. And so I am going to go with Javonte Barnes as my stat leader there. I think he's just going to be, his trust level is a lot higher. Gavin Sawchuk was kind of a situation where I think you had to play him more in that bowl game. Not that they didn't see his talent. Obviously, he proved that. But I think Barnes has a full season of building that trust with the coaches, which you do want a lot of trust in ball security and pass protection at that position. So I think Barnes gets first crack at it. I think he probably finishes somewhere around like 900 yards, 9 touchdowns for the year. I would like to feel a little bit better about his health situation, just because he got dinged up a lot last year and missed some time. So I'd like to think he's a little bit more durable there. And then I think Sawchuk also will be highly productive as well. But I think Barnes is the guy that you start with, at least in most games early in the season, and give him the lion's share of the carries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But not at all to say that like we're down on Sawchuk or anything. I think he's going to be really, really solid as well. But that leads us to the third running back position there. Whoever's going to be that third. It sounds like Marcus Major is going to be the guy to at least start the year. But Tyler, are you rolling with Marcus Major to be the third running back by the time the year wraps up?
If he can stay healthy, yes. Absolutely. I think that he probably has the biggest upside if he does have the ability to stay healthy for a full season. But I think that you're going to see when you try to project a third string running back, kind of depends on how you want to do it. Is it going to be a guy like Tawi Walker, who's going to be used primarily on, third and shorts or goal line situations? He's a bowling ball. Or is this going to be an instance where DeMarco Murray, he likes Caleb Hicks so much, and you go around some of the other sources, some of the other podcasts. I think Gabe and Teddy a week ago said that when they were out of practice for 2 or 3 sessions, they thought that Caleb Hicks was the best looking running back, and that included Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk. So maybe it is an instance where a guy like Caleb Hicks, who's a little bit more of a physical, well put together running back, maybe he's that closer role that we, came to see Trey Sermon, what he became so famous for during his time in Oklahoma. Go with Caleb Hicks. Let's ride the young guys.
Yeah. I really want Marcus Major to have a fully healthy season so
I
that
do
we can
too.
see what he can do over the course of a year. A guy that, by most fans' perspectives, probably would have transferred or should have transferred at this point, but he stuck around. And when he's been on the field, I don't think he's been dead weight or anything. I think he's
No,
produced.
no.
He just hasn't been able to stay super healthy. And so, again, it goes back to trust at that position. He's a guy that's been playing for a long time. I think the coaches will trust him a little bit more than they would for a true freshman. So, barring injuries, I do expect him to be that third running back.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else here on the running back position before we jump over to receivers?
No, not really. I just think that Oklahoma's sitting in a really good spot right now, and you got to give a lot of credit to DeMarco Murray. I think that the running back position 2 years ago there was a lot of question marks about it, but he's been able, with the last two recruiting cycles, he's been able to really transform this room. And I actually think that the running back is, one of the stronger positions on this football team. There's a lot of different types of backs, a lot of versatility, guys with different skill sets, and it's going to be fun to watch how DeMarco Murray and Jeff Levy choose to utilize these guys because they've got a really solid, talented collection of backs at their disposal.
Yeah, I think you like that there's multiple options. Not that you don't have a 1A, but you definitely have a 1B in that scenario. Like last year,
Sure.
it felt like it was Eric Gray and nothing else in a lot of ways. So you like the depth that's been built up there.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the receiver room has a lot of unknowns, a lot of question marks. Jalil Farouk returns with about 400 plus yards from last year, but other than that, a lot of unknowns as far as what this receiver room might look like. Everyone kind of assumes that Farouk is going to be the lead receiver there, but I don't know. I'm starting to wonder at this point because, I mean, he only had 400 and some yards last season. He wasn't really a focal point. He just kind of had some receptions here and there, and it added up over the course of the season. He's not really a deep threat, so I just wonder if his versatility is more limited than maybe some other guys on the roster. So, Tyler, if you had to choose today, is Jalil Farouk more of a 600-yard receiver or more of a 1,200-yard receiver? Got to go either or here.
I think that he's probably closer to a 600 type receiver, but I will say this. When you look at what some of the things that Jalil does extremely well, whether it's route running, whether it's, making plays when he's got the ball in his hands, Oklahoma is able to really utilize him in a handful of different ways, both catching the football down the field, but also, in the jet sweep type of role. I think that Jalil definitely has the ability to get to that, above the 1,000 yard mark, but I think a lot of that is predicated upon how much help he's getting from some of the other wide receivers in that room. Because if you can find a second and third guy, whether it's a Drake Stoops, a Gavin Freeman, an Andrell Anthony, who by everything that we've heard is having one hell of a fall camp here in Norman, if you're able to get two or three guys that can consistently make plays for Dillon Gabriel, then it takes away the ability for that opposing secondary to bracket Jalil Farouk, to stick a safety over the top. And if you can get some good production from three or four different guys, it's going to give Jalil Farouk more one-on-one opportunities. And, one-on-one, I like my guy better than almost anybody else in college football. And I think Jalil's going to have the opportunity to have a big-time year for Oklahoma.
Yeah. Farouk is a guy that, I think he's just going to be highly reliable. But I just wonder what the ceiling is. Like, could he do 1,000 yards, or is he more like the guy that's going to go for 750 yards?
Yeah.
Still fantastic, but begs the need for someone else to come into play there. And I just wonder who that is, because if you go back and look at past history of like a guy that really didn't do much one year, that was on the team, but then suddenly blew up and became the number one receiver, there's not a track record of OU doing that. There's guys coming in from junior college or guys transferring in from other schools. I think the biggest jump maybe I saw from like year one to year two of like literally doing like not much of anything was probably like Jazz Reynolds. That's a really old name. I think he went for like 250 yards one year and then actually took a year off. I think maybe he was not with the team, came back, did 750 yards. So I just wonder like how much impact could Jaden Gibson or Nick Anderson or Gavin Freeman actually provide, especially if Farouk is not, taking a huge leap forward. Like, could one of those guys be the number one receiver on this team? I just wonder, and I have a hard time seeing that. But maybe you feel differently. Maybe you feel more highly on one of these younger guys.
Well, let's not forget, Adam. What's a quarterback and a wide receiver's best friend? It's a really solid running game. So if Oklahoma's offensive line can play up to the Bill Beanball expectations, if Javante Barnes, Javante Barnes, Gavin Sawchuk can have the type of performances all season long that we expect them to, that's just going to make things easier for the guys out wide. So again, if you were asking me to project right now, is it closer to 600 or is it closer to 1200? If Oklahoma at all the other positions is playing up to the expectations that we come to expect from those guys in Crimson and Cream, then I think that it's probably a better chance that he does get closer to 1,200 than 600. But I'm buying all the stock in Jacquez Petaway, and I'm loving what I'm hearing out of Andrel Anthony so far. I think that what is thought to have been a weak position for this football team, I'm starting to kind of come around to the idea of it. It's just a matter of can they execute on Saturday starting here in 3 weeks.
Yeah, Andrel Anthony, I'm super excited to see, because was it just a situation at Michigan where he wasn't in the right offense, or is he kind of what he is in a scenario? And I kind of look back at past, I look back to the past a ton to see what type of role he might play, because I could give comparison, not in any way of play style at all, but in terms of production and value to the team. Like, is he going to be Jeff Badette, the type of guy that early in the season is a useful piece, but eventually seeds way to a younger player, maybe like a Petaway, for example, who I'm really starting to get on that bandwagon with you on Petaway? Or is Anthony more of like a Geno Lewis, a transfer from Penn State that was more of a season-long feature for Landry Jones in that
More of a
year
possession guy?
Well, and not at all in terms of that, because like totally different players, but like a guy that just was productive throughout the year at a consistent level.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see that there. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different interesting guys, and it you can go around and around and around about all of them, because we just really haven't seen much of any of them.
Well, and I mean, you go back to Jeff Lebby's moniker for his offense, it's score from far. And when you look at the wide receiver position, I mean, there's elite, not, I wouldn't say track speed across the board. There's definitely a couple guys that do have that, but I mean, there is speed all across the board. Farouk, Anthony, Petaway, Freeman, Brennan Thompson, even Nick Anderson and Jaden Gibson, who have been clocked at, extremely high speeds once they get the ball in their hands. But yeah, even though it is an unproven group right now, I like what Emma Jones is doing, coaching those guys up. And it's just going to come down to it plain and simple. Can they make plays on Saturdays? And we're going to find out in just 3 short weeks.
Yeah.
I can't believe how close it is. Like it always sneaks up on us. But I mean, the fact that here we are, 17 days away, 18 days away from football season, it's best time of year. It doesn't get any better.
Definitely. Now, the position group that's going to be supporting the wide receivers, of course, is the tight ends, kind of an old familiar face in Austin Stogner, and then a complete mystery beyond that. So let's start with Stogner. And the last time we saw him at OU, well, I guess was 2021. That was the year he came back from the injury. 2020 was really his best year in a Sooner uniform. Had 422 yards, 3 touchdowns. That's less than what Braden Willis provided last year from that position. Different player, different style, but do you think that Austin Stogner will be able to at least meet those numbers that he had in his best season in 2020?
Well, his best season in 2020 was 422 yards and 3 touchdowns. Yes, I do fully expect him to surpass both of those numbers, especially the touchdown mark. Like I said, what was Dylan's biggest struggle a year ago? It was making throws over the middle of the field. And I think that Austin Stogner, while he's not as athletic as a Braden Willis, I think that he's going to be a more than viable option for Dylan to be able to execute those plays over the middle of the field. And I think that people are really underestimating. Yes, I know the health has been a little bit of a concern, but he did just come off of a year where he played football in the SEC. He went up against Georgia, against the Alabamas of the world, and coming back to the Big 12, I think that even though he's not as athletic, maybe doesn't have as high of a ceiling as a Mark Andrews, definitely not a Jermaine Gresham, I still think that he's going to be he's going to be a difference maker for Oklahoma this upcoming year. And I think that you're going to see a big uptick in production from Austin Stogner compared to 2020.
So this is interesting because we took this question to Twitter to get some fan response as far as what they expected out of Austin Stogner.
Sure.
I was kind of surprised at some of the positive outlooks for him. It seems like you're more on the positive side. I think that he will get more than 3 touchdowns. I think he'll probably be less yardage wise than 422. I think he'll be more in the 350 range. So I kind of in alignment with what Sooner Paul responded on Twitter. Basically, he's expecting about 400 yards, 6 touchdowns. Hopefully, should be a first down machine. I would love to see that. I like you mentioned there, over the middle of the field. We also got Sooner Shane, kind of more in your line of thinking, 700 yards receiving, 6 touchdowns. I just wonder at this point, like, is he? I mean, he's been in college for enough time that we kind of know who he is. Maybe he wasn't the right fit at South Carolina. We know that, Spencer Rattler was his quarterback, but his best year was also with Spencer Rattler as the full-time starter. So I just wonder, like, what his health level is. Is OU going to diminish that position? Or, Foster KE said, is he going to be a red zone machine? That was a good submission we got on Twitter there. So I don't know. I have a lot of questions there in regards to Stogner.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting to watch how Jeff Levy utilizes him. I mean, is he going to be a guy that you can spread out wide? I don't necessarily think so. I think that, his bread's going to be buttered. He's going to have the opportunity to make, his fair share of plays lining up on the line of scrimmage and coming off that way. Because he does have the ability to be a red zone nightmare for opposing team defenses. If you could get him, matched up on a linebacker or, a shorter, smaller stature safety, then I think he has an opportunity to make some plays. But then I think, honestly, Adam, depth is a huge concern at this position for me, because once you get past Austin Stogner, where do you go? Like, who do you turn to next? I know that there's been a lot of talk about, Jace Llewellyn. He's coming back from injuries. Blake Smith, the transfer from Texas A&M. We even heard from Brent Venables, 24 hours ago. He was hyping up some of the things that he's seen from the Michigan State transfer, Hampton Fay, who's, quarterback turned tight end. He's making some plays out there. So it just kind of remains to be seen. But there's one thing to kind of tie this into recruiting. You look at Devon Mitchell, who's going to be coming in. You look at Oklahoma is continuing to make headway ultimately in the 2025 class. We've got some positive news from the one of the Roberts brothers out of Washington, Oklahoma, decommitted from Notre Dame earlier today. So again, you've got to play good, aggressive football, but tight end is probably the one position on this football team that you cannot afford an injury to the starter, because after that, it's pretty bare.
Yeah. A year ago, Daniel Parker was our number 2 tight end. He had 4 receptions for 28 yards. So OU fans really didn't have to learn his name. He was more of a blocking,
and he was a hell of a blocker.
Yeah, he's a great blocker.
Give him more credit where it's due.
But so was Braden Willis. So, with Braden Willis, you had a guy you didn't want to take off the field. With Stogner, I think you probably, because of health concerns from the past and just being able to manage that position better, I think you'd like to get some other guys in the mix there. But yeah, it becomes a question of who? And, Josh Faneuil, a name that you didn't bring up earlier, but the former basketball player that's playing football for the very first time, I feel like he'll probably do something, late in a game against Tulsa or something that will wow people. But I don't think he'll be an effective, guy to play a ton of snaps. And then Cade McIntyre, the true freshman, everyone loves, what he looks like physically, but how effective will he be? So yeah, you'd love to see someone really separate themselves there to become that number 2 guy, because it is a complete mystery and definitely a concern, because we know that Stogner has missed some time with injuries in the past.
Sure.
Let's move to offensive line here to wrap up the podcast here. A lot of hype going into fall camp, currently in fall camp, around what this group's able to provide. They lost 2 NFL draft picks last year in Anton Harrison and Wanye Morris, but bring in Walter Rouse from Stanford, bring in Tyler Guyton, who was in reserves last year, but everyone's very high on him. You've got a couple pieces in the middle there, some talent across the board. So, Tyler, what for you in this group here, what does success look like for them?
You lead the Big 12 in rushing, plain and simple.
They did it last year, didn't they?
They were,
I believe so.
I think they did. And, from some of the things that are coming out of Norman, particularly, Bill Bedenbaugh, they might even feel better about this offensive line as a whole than they did a year ago, which is saying a lot when you've got 2 offensive tackles drafted in the first 3 rounds. But yeah, when you look at the stable of backs that Oklahoma is going to have at their disposal, I know that Kansas State is returning, a huge portion, if not all, of their experience a year ago on the offensive line. But I mean, if you're at Oklahoma, if you're Jeff Lebby and, you make your money on running the football and, beating people to death over the course of 4 quarters, then yeah, you got to lead the conference in rushing, and you got to keep Dillon Gabriel upright in pass protection, which when you look at this schedule, Adam, outside of Texas, TCU is going to have some playmakers out on the edge. We dodge Tech, we dodge Baylor, we dodge Kansas State. Those are really kind of 3 teams that have given Oklahoma fits the last couple of years with their front sevens. Yeah, you go out there and you lead the conference in rushing. There's no excuse not to.
I definitely want to see a bigger improvement on the pass protection side of things. Last year, OU finished number 81 nationally in sacks allowed with 31 on the year. So I think that's one thing that gets overlooked a lot in regards to Dillon Gabriel's performance, because that's directly tied to it. But if he's able to have a little bit better protection, I think his season turns out a lot better last year. So new pieces in there, some with experience, whether it be at OU or elsewhere. But for me, I would really just like to see, I think, the best 5 players out on the field. Not necessarily, it feels like every week I'm putting Matire on kind of a pedestal to shame there, but we need the best version of Rame. We need the best version of Savion Byrd. And we need some of these younger guys to kind of overtake some of these older guys, in my opinion, just because I think that bodes well for the overall ceiling and success of what this offensive line is able to provide, because you're only as good as your offensive line. If you have a bad offensive line, unless your quarterback is Caleb Williams, who can really erase a lot of deficits there, like, you're only as good as what that offensive line is able to do. So early and often, would love to see this offensive line paving the way for these running backs and for protecting Dillon Gabriel.
We talked a few minutes ago about Jackson Arnold, a true freshman, the ability for him to get on the field and see, playing time early in his career at Oklahoma, preparing him, ultimately for next season where he's the starter. I think a similar argument needs to be made for some of the guys in the offensive line room. I mean, just looking at what is the projected starting 5, you've got 3 guys that are, seniors or redshirt seniors that are going to be gone after this upcoming season. And that doesn't even include Tyler Guyton, who after this upcoming year is still going to have another year of eligibility left. So I think, for Oklahoma you've got to play good, solid, complementary football, because you've got to put some of these inferior teams away early so that it gives, Bill Beanbaugh the opportunity to play a Jacob Sexton, to play a Jake Taylor, a Troy Everett, get Josh Bates in there a little bit, because those are guys that you're going to be relying upon once you get into the SEC 12 months from now. We just hope that Oklahoma gives them the opportunity to do so.